Sometimes the most violent thing isn't the blow itself, it's the silence that follows. The kind of silence that fills a concrete cell, that stares at you through one-way glass, that tells you without saying a word, you don't belong here, and no one will believe you if you say otherwise. She didn't cry. Not when the cuffs cut skin. Not when her name disappeared under a charge sheet filled with lies. Because something deeper held her still, discipline wrapped in memory, grief stitched into breath. You could see it in her eyes. A woman carrying the weight of every person who was ever punished for doing the right thing. This isn't a story about anger. It's about restraint. It's about what happens when the system tries to erase the wrong person and she remembers exactly who she is. And what happens next? It doesn't just change her. It changes everything. Celeste Harrington didn't expect Grayridge to remember her name. She didn't expect anything from the town at all. It was supposed to be a gas and go, a coffee stop on the quiet stretch between Yellowstone and the Canadian border. The kind of place where people didn't look twice at an out-of-state license plate. But that was before the fall, before the blood, before the cuffs. She'd been inside the Twin Pines General Store for less than 4 minutes when she saw Jaime, a slender elderly man, maybe in his 70s, pale and jittery, reaching for a tin of cat food near the freezer aisle. His fingers trembled. His knee buckled. He didn't fall hard just enough for his dignity to scrape the ground. And like muscle memory, Celeste moved. She caught him mid-collapse, one arm bracing his back, the other steadying his elbow. Her voice was calm, firm, like it had been when she gave battlefield orders. "Let's get you off this cold floor, sir." He nodded, embarrassed but grateful. She sat him down by the register and called out to the cashier for help. The man's name was Mr. Liang, retired math teacher. Migrated to Montana to be near his daughter. By the time the store manager brought a bottle of water and an ice pack, Mr. Liang was smiling, gently patting Celeste's forearm as if she were family. But the warmth vanished with the screech of tires outside. Red and blue lights pierced the front windows like jagged glass. 3 officers stormed in, led by a tall, broad-shouldered man whose badge shone brighter than his eyes. Sheriff Claude Miles. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at Mr. Liang. He looked straight at Celeste, tall, muscular, mid-40s, black. Composidan reached for his holster. "Step away from the man, hands where I can see him." Mr. Liang raised his voice in protest. "She was helping me. I said step away." Celeste froze for half a second. She knew the drill, the rules, the way escalation works when skin color walks ahead of explanation. She stood, slowly, raising both hands as if saluting a ghost. "I'm not resisting," she said calmly. 2 deputies lunged anyway. The wall of canned soup shook as her back hit it. Her breath snapped from her chest. One deputy slammed her wrist into the tile. Another pressed a knee between her shoulder blades. The cuffs bit into her skin like tiny steel teeth. Blood followed. Someone gasped. A phone camera clicked. "She was just helping," the store manager shouted. No one listened. Sheriff Miles picked up the dog tags hanging from her backpack. He dangled them like bait. "You playin' soldier now?" Celeste didn't flinch. "I'm a retired Army intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel. My credentials are in my wallet." "You don't say," he sneered. "And I'm the president of Harvard." Mr. Liang tried to stand, voice shaking. "She helped me. I slipped." "Sir, sit down," an officer warned him. "Don't interfere with an investigation." Celeste didn't argue. She didn't yell. She'd been trained to breathe through stress, to remain still under sniper fire, to wait in Afghan caves for 19 hours without twitching. But nothing in her decorated service prepared her for the humiliation of being paraded out of a store with blood on her wrists and no one believing the truth. Outside, customers stared. A child cried. Someone whispered, "What'd she do?" And someone else replied, "Don't know. Looks scary though." Her badge was gone. Her name gone. In that moment, she was nothing more than suspect. The booking was swift, mechanical. Her military ID vanished during processing. Her charges: assault, attempted theft, resisting arrest. The cuffs were never loosened, not when she told them they were too tight. Not when she asked for a medic. Not when the bleeding soaked through her shirt sleeve. "Oops," said the booking sergeant. "Busy day." Sheriff Miles leaned in close before she was placed in her holding cell. "You people think you can flash medals and scare towns like this. Not how it works here, sweetheart." She didn't respond. She stared past him, into something colder than the cement walls. Gray Ridge County Jail smelled like bleach and humiliation. They gave her a mattress that leaked air and a pillow that crunched like packing foam. The fluorescent lights buzzed through the night. No phone call, no medical care. No one explained anything. And still, Celeste didn't cry. She didn't break. But inside, something was unraveling. Not from pain, but from the echo of silence. That unique silence that swells when everything inside you screams, and no one outside hears it. The silence of being misunderstood on purpose. She replayed the moment over and over. Mr. Liang's fall, her reflex, the thank you in his eyes. Then the gun drawn, the violence, the switch from helper to threat. How fast it happened. How invisible her intentions had become. In the morning, she stared at the fluorescent flicker above her bunk and thought of her father's funeral, how the flags had folded perfectly into triangles, how men in uniform saluted her. How proud she felt of a country that now refused to believe she could do something decent without having a hidden motive. Her breath slowed, her eyes closed, her wrists pulsed beneath the dried blood. She hadn't been this alone in a very long time, and even during her worst deployments overseas, she'd never once doubted her worth. But in Gray Ridge, she wasn't Celeste Harrington, war hero. She was just another suspect. And something about that cut deeper than any weapon ever could. Celeste Harrington learned quickly that silence wasn't a void. It was a weapon. In Gray Ridge County Jail, silence did not simply hover, it pressed, pushed, suffocated. On the second day, her cell was accidentally missed during breakfast rounds. She sat upright on the edge of the cot, back straight, watching the tray cart roll past without pause. No one looked in. No one explained. The night before, they'd spilled bleach just outside her cell door. The fumes had soaked into her lungs, irritating her throat. She coughed for an hour, alone, eyes watering, while a guard chuckled just loud enough for her to hear. That morning, her wrists were still raw, the scabs torn during sleep, reopening without mercy. When she knocked to ask for medical gauze, the guard on duty didn't speak. He simply raised his walkie-talkie, pressed the side button, and whispered something too soft to understand. 27 minutes later, a male officer opened her door and placed a paper towel inside. That was it. No disinfectant, no bandages, just something to wipe the blood. And Celeste said nothing. Noah Whitaker didn't expect to care. He was used to the rhythm of failure plea bargains, rubber-stamped convictions, budget-strangled representation. He wasn't lazy, just tired. Fresh out of law school 3 years ago, he came to Gray Ridge imagining small-town charm, civic duty, and courtroom integrity. He got quotas, backroom deals, and a backlog of poor defendants told to plead guilty before they even asked what the charges were. But something about Celeste was different. It wasn't just her composure or military record. It was the way she made eye contact, direct, unflinching, and surgical. The way she assessed him in their first meeting, like she was cataloging every weakness, every hesitation, every shortcut he might try to take. "You've been offered a deal," he told her, sliding the paper across the steel table. 6 months county time. You'll be out in 3 with good behavior. Celeste looked down at the sheet. Assault, theft, resisting arrest. 3 charges, 3 lies. "I won't sign it," she said. "It's standard," Noah replied. "Given your background, they could push for years." She tapped a finger on the table. It wasn't nervous, it was timed, like a metronome. "This isn't standard. This is strategic. They're counting on me to fold because I'm passing through. They're counting on your office being too overwhelmed to fight, and they're counting on me not having the stamina to go the distance." Noah blinked. "I'm not here for your sympathy, Mr. Whitaker," she said softly. "I'm here for your spine." Later that evening, He stayed up in his home office until 2:00 a.m., poring over Gray Ridge's court records. Over 80% of out-of-town black defendants were arrested for disturbances. Most pled out within 72 hours. Few returned. The charges often had no corroborating evidence, just officer reports and missing surveillance. It wasn't just wrong, it was a playbook. And suddenly, Celeste wasn't just another client. She was a wedge, a crack in the structure. Back in detention, Celeste kept watching. She watched the guard rotations, the pattern of skipped medications for one diabetic inmate named Tasha, the way letters to outside family members were lost in transit. The subtle, quiet neglect wasn't about chaos, it was about control, controlled exposure to suffering. Just enough to remind them, you don't matter here. Celeste hadn't spoken to another inmate directly. Not yet. But they were watching her too. On day 4, a small woman named Marcy slid a folded scrap of toilet paper under the bars of her cell. On it was a crude drawing of handcuffs and a note written in red pen. Same thing happened to my brother. They made him say he had a knife. He didn't. He still took the deal. Celeste didn't respond, but that night, she folded her torn bedsheet into a thin band and wrapped it around her wrist, covering the scabbed cuts. It wasn't about hiding. It was about telling herself her body still belonged to her. 3 days after the arrest, her name appeared on the morning news. Former Army officer accused in Gray Ridge incident. The segment was under 2 minutes. It aired between the weather and a feature on cattle pricing. They showed her mugshot. They did not show her rank. They did not mention her 3 deployments or the Bronze Star. They quoted Sheriff Miles. The suspect exhibited aggression and presented a potential threat given her military background. We responded according to protocol. No mention of Mr. Liang. No mention of assistance. No context. A narrative had begun to form. Inside her cell, Celeste began to break pattern. She walked 5,000 steps a day measured through pace count and wall markings. She used her fingernail to carve dates into the underside of her cot. She kept her mind sharp with mental math drills, intelligence recall exercises, and silent repetition of mission debrief formats. She hadn't been deployed in nearly 5 years, but her mind was back in field command. Each evening, she wrote with borrowed pencil fragments, creating coded summaries of observed misconduct. 8:32 a.m. Inmate diabetic, denied insulin for inventory check. 10:51 a.m. Guard search without cause. Officer Dixon. 1:0 p.m. Inmate mail returned marked undeliverable. Third occurrence. She slipped notes to Noah during meetings. He scanned them silently, the weight of their implications growing heavier with each visit. These aren't just observations, he told her once. This is testimony. Celeste's reply was calm, almost clinical. That's what war zones teach you. Don't panic. Collect, verify, document. 1 week in, the pressure increased. Guards began accidentally misfiling her legal appointments. Noah was turned away twice at the gate. A requested review of surveillance footage from the store was denied on grounds of equipment failure. Her file of military credentials remained unavailable. Sheriff Miles visited her cell personally on a Wednesday night. "You've got a whole lot of people asking questions about you," he said, leaning against the bars. "Colonels, reporters, lawyers from out of state." Celeste didn't reply. He studied her face. "You could be out by morning if you sign, seal the records, walk away." Her voice, when it came, was level. "I've walked away from ambushes. I don't walk away from the truth." He stepped closer. "You think you're better than us?" She looked at him for the first time, not with contempt, with precision. "I think you're sloppy, and loud, and arrogant enough to believe no one will notice, but they're noticing now." He turned and left. Noah was nearly hit by a truck on his way home the next day. A message, no doubt. His office was broken into that night. Nothing stolen, but files tossed, computer systems wiped. The only thing untouched was Celeste's case file placed neatly back on his desk. He called his father, a retired judge, for advice. The old man didn't hesitate. If they're shaking the tree, it means something's about to fall. Don't blink. Noah didn't blink. Celeste remained focused. Every meal missed became an opportunity to test endurance. Every insult became fuel. Every surveillance blind spot became a tactical map. She'd spent years navigating intelligence corridors and hostile terrains. This was no different. The walls were smaller, the language less coded, but the war was the same: domination through fear. In her mind, she repeated a phrase that had once saved her life on the edge of a ravine in Helmand Province. "They don't get to write my last line." She wasn't fighting for freedom. She was fighting for the narrative, for the ability to say, "This happened, and I didn't let it define me." Inmates started leaving her folded notes. "They made me lie. They told me I'd lose my kids. They laughed when I cried." And still, she never cried. Her silence wasn't absence, it was defiance. Because in Grey Ridge, speaking out too early meant being erased faster. But waiting, watching, gathering, that was power. Noah, fueled by her documentation, filed a Freedom of Information request on the Sheriff's Department. He began tracing financial records, private contracts, arrest quotas, campaign donations. What he found unsettled him. Grey Ridge County received bonus funding from a state-level grant program that rewarded high conviction rates. Out-of-town arrests made up nearly half of the town's entire legal revenue. Celeste wasn't an anomaly. She was a revenue stream. By the end of her second week in detention, Celeste sat in her cell and exhaled slowly. Her wrists, now scarred and clean, rested on her lap. She no longer looked at the cameras. She looked through them. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't realize they had chosen the wrong person to silence. She wasn't just another name on a docket. She was the first domino in a system that had never planned for resistance. And the silence? The silence was just the prelude. Trevor Dane was halfway through his breakfast in Spokane when he saw her face. The news clip wasn't long, just a local anchor summarizing an ongoing legal case in Grey Ridge, Montana. Former Army officer Celeste Harrington faces 3 felony charges following a disturbance at a local convenience store. The camera cut to grainy footage of a black woman being forced into a squad car, her wrists bloodied, her jaw clenched tight. He dropped his fork. Trevor hadn't seen her in 8 years, not since their last mission in Kandahar, when she'd volunteered to crawl 300 yards through sniper crossfire to retrieve a wounded Marine, Trevor's brother. She'd come back soaked in blood, her own and his, eyes like steel, voice steady. "He's breathing. Let's move." Now she was the one bleeding, alone. Trevor picked up the phone. He didn't call the news station. He called someone who still owed him a favor, Colonel Elena Ruiz. Colonel Ruiz was 5 minutes into a high-level strategy briefing at Fort Belvoir when her secure line lit up. She never ignored a call from Dane. The voice on the other end was low, urgent, its whisper. Ruiz felt her stomach drop. "Celeste? Arrested. Grey Ridge, Montana. Video shows rough treatment. She hasn't called for help, but I think she's in trouble." Ruiz didn't hesitate. "Send me everything, now." She ended the call, stood up, and walked straight out of the meeting. Back in Grey Ridge, Noah Whitaker sat in his office surrounded by printouts, timelines, maps, and financial disclosures. Celeste's notes had become his gospel. Her discipline had infected him. He no longer slept more than 4 hours a night. He no longer doubted. There was a system, Hiria. Quiet, sanctioned economy built on injustice. Out-of-town black defendants. Inflated charges. No public oversight. And the engine behind it all, federal performance-based funding funneled through the sheriff's office and private jail contracts. But he needed outside support. Someone with weight. Someone who could punch through walls without waiting for permission. That's when the call came. "Mr. Whitaker, this is Colonel Elena Ruiz, U.S. Army retired. I understand you're representing Celeste Harrington." Noah blinked. Yes, I am. I need everything you have. She once saved my life. It's time I return the favor." 2 hours later, Ruiz was on a private military transport to Montana. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She didn't need to. Her name alone carried weight, and she wasn't coming alone. She'd activated a quiet veterans network former, special forces, logistics officers, intelligence analysts. The kind of people who'd seen systems like this before, in places that didn't always speak English. They came from Arkansas, New York, Arizona, and they were all coming for one reason: whisper. Meanwhile, inside Grey Ridge Detention, Celeste felt something shift. The guards were quieter, the lights dimmed at the correct hour. Her meals started arriving again, warm this time. One even came with a folded note tucked beneath the tray. "We see you." But it wasn't fear she sensed in the air. It was awareness. They knew eyes were coming. And predators only snarl when they think they're unobserved. Mr. Liang's granddaughter, Hannah, had been searching for updates since the incident. She knew her grandfather wasn't confused like the officers suggested. He taught advanced calculus until he was 75. His memory was sharp, his voice steady. When she'd visited him last week, he whispered what really happened. "She helped me. They told me to be quiet." Hannah recorded the conversation, then sent it to a journalist she followed online. Eliza Chen, a former New York Times reporter now running her own independent investigations into small-town corruption. Within 24 hours, Eliza published a story titled, "Decorated Veteran Arrested for Helping Man Who Fell Systemic Abuse in Montana." The article included arrest data from Grey Ridge, quotes from prior defendants, and screenshots of jail funding reports. It trended within 3 hours. Celeste's silence was no longer solitary. Noah sat across from her during their next legal consult, his face brighter than it had been since they met. "Colonel Elena Ruiz is here," he said, and she brought backup. Celeste didn't flinch, but her hand paused mid-page. And we now have affidavits from 3 other defendants with similar charges, a whistleblower from inside the department, and a journalist digging into Judge Granger's donation history. Celeste looked at him, her voice soft but heavy. "They'll fight back harder now." "I know," he said, "but so will we." The sheriff's office was already feeling the pressure. Ruiz's arrival made it worse. Sheriff Miles wasn't prepared for a retired colonel with contacts at the Department of Defense. He certainly wasn't prepared for the veterans gathering quietly outside the courthouse, standing shoulder to shoulder, no signs, no chance, just presence. Local police tried to scatter them with warnings about loitering. They didn't move. Ruiz walked into the courthouse like she owned it. She met with Noah, reviewed case files, listened to voice recordings, and watched the corrupted body cam footage. "They cut this on purpose," she said. "There's metadata missing from the timestamps." She made a few calls. The next day, a federal tech expert named Amir Khoury flew in from D.C. Inside detention, a young black officer named Jackson slipped Celeste an envelope during a cell check. It was against protocol. It could have cost him his job. Inside was a photo. Celeste in uniform, mid-salute, standing beside a presidential flag. A note written in neat block letters read, "Some of us never stopped watching. Honest recon." For the first time since her arrest, Celeste sat down and allowed herself one slow exhale. Not relief, not comfort, but confirmation. She hadn't been erased. Ruiz coordinated with Eliza Chen, who launched a deeper investigation into the town's economic structure. What she found was staggering. Grey Ridge received over $2 million annually from state-level initiatives tied to conviction rates. Most arrests, black travelers often cited for interfering, resisting, or disturbing. Eliza published a second article, "The Price of Justice in Grey Ridge: How a Montana Town Profits from Profiling." The fallout was immediate. News crews arrived. Social media exploded. The local paper once silent printed an op-ed titled, "We Need to Talk About Our Sheriff." The town was waking up. That evening, Ruiz met with Noah and Celeste in a secured room. "You know what they're going to do next," she said. Celeste nodded. "They'll escalate, try to discredit, frame us as agitators, maybe even push for psychological evaluation." "Already happening," Noah added. "They've filed a motion to limit your testimony, citing potential PTSD impairing judgment. Ruiz laughed bitterly. That's rich, considering your calm is the only reason you're still alive. Celeste didn't smile, but she leaned forward. Then let's give them a better story, one they can't control. The next day, the unthinkable happened. Mr. Liang showed up outside the jail. With him was a handwritten statement, notarized, asserting that Celeste had only ever helped him and that the police had repeatedly told him to let it go and trust their report. His daughter filmed him reading the statement aloud, trembling but resolute. It went viral. Sheriff Miles attempted damage control, but every attempt made things worse. He claimed Mr. Liang was confused, that he had health issues. But Mr. Liang had just passed a cognitive exam with flying colors from his family doctor, who published the results online. The narrative had flipped. Celeste wasn't the danger, the system was. Meanwhile, Amir Khoury recovered full segments of the deleted bodycam footage. What it showed was devastating. Celeste, calm and respectful, helping a man sit. Officers ignoring explanations. Mr. Liang's voice saying, "She's helping me," repeatedly. Her immediate compliance. The unnecessary force. The bleeding. It was clear. It was undeniable. And it was submitted to court as part of a new motion. Motion to dismiss on grounds of fabricated evidence and civil rights violations. The sheriff's department doubled down. That night, Celeste's cell was searched. Her notes were confiscated. The excuse? Contraband. Communication. But she had already memorized every line. In the dark, she whispered the timeline to herself. Each violation, each skipped dose, each name. Whisper, the nickname they gave her in the field, wasn't just because of her quiet voice. It was because she saw everything and waited until the exact moment to strike. Now that moment had arrived. Sheriff Miles attempted a final move, file a new charge against Celeste, intimidation of an officer. A blatant overreach, based on a misquoted comment she allegedly made to a deputy. It was quickly dismantled by Ruiz and Noah, who produced hours of jail audio logs confirming no such exchange had occurred. Then came the first FBI inquiry. An agent from the Civil Rights Division arrived in town. Quiet, observing. The mood shifted again. Celeste walked into her next hearing flanked by two attorneys, her back straight, her wrists bandaged neatly. The courtroom was packed. Veterans filled every seat in the back row. Eliza Chen sat beside a national correspondent. Sheriff Miles avoided her eyes. And Judge Granger? He knew this was no longer his courtroom. Celeste Harrington could feel the cracks forming. They weren't visible enough yet, but she knew the sound, the slow shifting of a structure under pressure. It was the same sound she'd heard in distant outposts in Afghanistan, just before a wall caved under enemy mortar, the same sound that came before collapse. Except this time, the walls belonged to Grayridge. And she wasn't under fire, she was under watch. Since the footage had gone public, the jail had changed its posture. Guards now stood straighter when near her cell. Orders were barked less frequently. Food arrived on time, warm and packaged. But the kindness wasn't reality, it was control through optics. Celeste didn't take the change as a victory. She took it as confirmation. They were nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. She began moving more deliberately, speaking even less, every word chosen, measured. When a new Inmatia young girl, no older than 20, arrived, crying and bruised, Celeste didn't offer comfort immediately. She waited, then, quietly, passed her a folded towel during lineup. No words, just a nod. The next morning, the girl left a torn notebook page under Celeste's pillow. On it were 6 names other girls who had been brought in over the last 2 months, all arrested during highway traffic stops for public disorder. 5 had taken plea deals. 1 had tried to resist. No one had seen her since. Celeste memorized every name, then burned the page in her sink. Outside, the town simmered. The courthouse lawn was occupied by rows of veterans, standing in quiet formation each morning. They wore jackets with old patches. Some brought lawn chairs. Others just stood. They never shouted, never disrupted. They didn't need to. Their stillness said everything. We are watching, and we don't blink. Sheriff Miles tried to downplay their presence. Outside interference, he called it, but even his allies had begun to squirm. The news cycle had changed. National networks sent camera crews. Local businesses whispered about lost tourism. Grey Ridge had become a symbol, and symbols carry weight. In the jail's legal room, Noah and Colonel Ruiz worked shoulder to shoulder now. Their strategies were sharp, precise. They stopped reacting and began dictating. They had the footage. They had whistleblowers. They had financial records connecting Judge Granger to a private detention contractor, Graybridge Holdings LLC, a shell company, used to funnel public infrastructure grants into his retirement portfolio. But Celeste wanted more. This isn't just about me, she told them, voice low but deliberate. They've done this to people who can't fight back. Kids, women without family, men who never got their phone call. I won't be their exception story. I want the system exposed. Ruiz looked at her long and hard. Then we won't just win your case, she said. We'll dismantle theirs. That afternoon, Celeste was offered a deal. Again. This time it came from the county prosecutor himself, not through paper or suggestion, but a personal visit. You walk, he said, arms folded. Today, charges dropped, but you sign the NDA. Agree to non-disclosure. No lawsuits, no testimony, no speeches. You just disappear. Celeste looked at him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She simply said, You mistake my silence for surrender. I've been quiet because I was gathering strength, but you don't get to decide how this ends. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. You're risking everything. She leaned forward. So are you. Within hours, her legal team filed a civil suit not just against the sheriff's department, but against the county, the judge, and the private contractors who profited from inflated incarceration numbers. The lawsuit included over 400 pages of documentation, financial ledgers, edited footage metadata, email exchanges between officials referencing pass-throughs, and affidavits from former inmates. The final exhibit was a letter written in Celeste's hand, addressed to the governor of Montana. It detailed her experience not as a victim, but as a witness. It closed with a line that would later be quoted across news outlets. Power doesn't corrupt all men, but it protects the ones who already are, and silence is how it survives. The next morning, the guards found Celeste doing push-ups in her cell. She was already on her 300th rep, her body slick with sweat, her breath controlled. She rose to her feet with military precision, wiped her face, and stared out the small slot in her cell door. One guard looked away. The other just swallowed hard. Eliza Chen's third report broke everything open. It revealed that 62% of Grey Ridge's jail revenue came from cases involving out-of-county residents, that the town used a traffic camera system to identify out-of-state plates and flag them for random stops, that internal emails referred to black travelers as fish in arrest summaries. Even the state's attorney general couldn't ignore it now. A special investigator was appointed. Subpoenas were issued. Judge Granger was asked to step down temporarily. Sheriff Miles refused until the FBI arrived to seize his office computer. That afternoon, he held a press conference. He smiled tightly, called the accusations media-fueled lies. Behind him stood two deputies. Neither made eye contact with the camera. Back in detention, Celeste wasn't watching the news. She was teaching. Inmates had started requesting to be housed near her, not because she was charismatic, but because she brought a sense of structure, routine, safety. She organized a book-sharing rotation, a quiet meditation hour. She asked the guards for paper and pens under the guise of legal preparation, then passed them to other inmates to write letters home, statements for court, or simply poems to themselves. She didn't ask for permission. She just did it. And no one stopped her. Because authority recognizes authority, even when it's not wearing a badge. On day 37, Noah walked into the visitation room, carrying something wrapped in a cloth. He laid it on the table, gently. Celeste unfolded it. It was her uniform jacket. Pressed, clean, decorated with ribbons earned across continents. He spoke slowly. The judge may try to block it as prejudicial, but the jury will see it eventually. She didn't touch the fabric. She just stared at it. And for the first time since her arrest, something flickered behind her eyes. Grief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or something heavier, like memory. She nodded once, folded it back, and slid it across the table. When the moment comes, she said, I want to earn it again, in that courtroom. Ruiz stayed in Grey Ridge longer than she'd planned. She gave interviews, attended town hall meetings, spoke with veterans. She wasn't just there for Celeste anymore. She was there because she knew how power moved slowly, then all at once. And she knew a reckoning was coming. The sheriff's department attempted one last stunt. A sudden transfer request for Celeste claimed, for security purposes. They planned to move her to a maximum security facility 2 counties away. Ruiz filed an emergency injunction. It was approved within hours. The judge who signed it was federal. The tide had turned. Celeste spent her last night in Grey Ridge County Detention awake. She didn't pace, didn't write. She sat cross-legged on her cot, hands resting on her knees, and stared at the wall. Not with frustration, not with fear, but with focus. She knew that the trial would not be the end, that justice didn't live in verdicts, it lived in patterns, broken slowly, painfully. But she also knew this. They had tried to erase her, and failed. Because no system, not even a deeply entrenched, financially motivated, racially coded one, could withstand the power of someone who refused to be defined by it. When they came to take her to court the next morning, she stood without instruction, walked without hesitation, and as she passed through the corridor, every occupied cell tapped once on the bars. It wasn't loud. It wasn't defiant. It was respect. And Celeste didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just kept walking. Because quiet dignity doesn't need to announce itself. It simply endures. Celeste Harrington entered the courtroom with her posture unbent and her pace unwavering. The room, packed to capacity, fell still the moment she stepped in. A row of veterans stood at attention in the back, their eyes forward. Reporters whispered into microphones. The jury, already seated, watched her movements closely. But it was the judge, a new one now, federal, impartial, unsmiling, who spoke first. This court is now in session for the matter of Harrington v. Grey Ridge County. No introductions, no pleasantries, just truth. Finally, Noah stood beside her, calm and collected, though his fingers twitched slightly against the edge of the table. Across from them sat a rotated team of prosecutors from the state's oversight office. Granger and Miles were now under federal investigation and had been barred from participating. The trial wasn't just about Celeste anymore. It was about records, about quotas, about bodies locked away and silenced for profit. But no matter how wide the scope, it began with her story. So she told it. Celeste took the stand in full view of a national audience. Her voice didn't waver, but she didn't dramatize either. She spoke like a soldier giving a briefing, clear, neutral, steady. She described the moment she saw Mr. Liang fall, how she moved without thinking, the way she'd been trained, how quickly help became suspicion, how swiftly her silence became interpreted as threat. She described the cuffs, the blood, the dog tags dangling like bait. I was not afraid, she said. I was evaluated. A pause. Her eyes scanned the jury. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of what I represented. A black woman who doesn't flinch. A veteran who doesn't bow. A witness they couldn't control. The prosecutors tried to paint her as confrontational, as someone who refused to comply. They brought up her military background as if it were a liability, a source of dangerous training rather than discipline. Noah let them. Then quietly he played the uncut body cam footage. Silence. Celeste's calm voice filled the speakers. "I'm not resisting." Her hands in the air. Mr. Leong's protests. The slam into the wall. The cuffs tearing her skin. Unprovoked. Unmistakable. Unjust. Veterans testified next. Men and women who had served beside her. A Marine named Clay Richards told the court, "We used to say, if Whisper's on watch, we sleep easy. You don't get that kind of trust in the field unless you've proven yourself again and again. In life or death situations, if Celeste Harrington says something's wrong, you'd better believe it's wrong." Colonel Ruiz testified via affidavit, citing mission details, commendations, and classified operations that had only recently been declassified under pressure. But the most damning testimony came from Deputy Jackson, the young officer who had quietly passed Celeste the photo weeks earlier. "I joined the force because I wanted to help people," he said, hands folded in his lap. "But from the start, there were codes, expectations. We were told to focus on out-of-towners, especially if they were black or looked military. They said they might be carrying, that they were harder to convict unless scared into a plea." He paused, looked at Celeste. "I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know what to do until she showed me how to stand still without backing down." Over the course of the trial, over a dozen witnesses came forward. Former detainees, family members of victims, even a few former deputies who had left the force but never spoken out until now. The picture that emerged was one of deliberate design. Arrest, isolate, intimidate, profit. They called it phishing. And Celeste had been the one who bit back. The verdict came on a cold Monday afternoon. The jury returned after only 5 hours. Not guilty on all charges. Unanimous. Applause broke decorum, but the judge let it ring for a few moments before calling for silence. Then, with a firm and steady voice, he addressed the court. "This case has revealed not just the wrongful arrest of a single individual, but the misuse of authority, the manipulation of justice for monetary gain, and the silencing of truth under the weight of bureaucracy. Miss Harrington, you did not just endure injustice, you exposed it." Celeste stood, thanked the judge, and exited the courtroom without celebration. There was no victory dance. Because this wasn't victory. It was just daylight after too long in darkness. In the weeks that followed, the consequences rippled outward. Sheriff Miles was indicted on federal charges of civil rights violations, falsification of records, conspiracy. Judge Granger faced disbarment and a formal ethics investigation that uncovered nearly 2 decades of racially skewed sentencing patterns. The private prison contractor that funded the quota system lost its state contract. Investigations opened in 3 other counties, modeled after Grayridge's arrest for revenue system. Celeste didn't speak to the press right away. She declined interviews, ignored book offers, and refused the sudden wave of public adoration. Instead, she stayed in Montana. She met with families of other victims. She listened. She took notes. 2 months later, she held a press conference outside a courthouse, but on the steps of the newly repurposed Grayridge Community Center. It had once been the town's juvenile detention annex. Now it bore a new plaque, the Harrington Justice Resource Center. Celeste stepped to the podium, her posture calm, her jacket modest, her tone restrained. "This building was once used to intimidate children. Now it will help defend them. We'll offer legal aid, education on constitutional rights, advocacy for veterans, and for every person who's been told their voice was too soft or their truth too inconvenient, we'll make sure they're heard." Inside the lobby, the first room to the left had been converted into a quiet reading space. On the door hung a brass sign, engraved in simple script, "The room that bears their name." Below it, a second line, "Dedicated to all who endured in silence." It wasn't named after Celeste. It was named for everyone she had met inside those walls. Everyone who hadn't gotten a trial, who'd taken the deal, who never made it out. It was their room, their space, their legacy. Veterans across the country launched a new initiative, WatchGuard modeled after what happened in Grayridge. They stood outside courthouses during local hearings, not disrupting, not interfering, just being there. like shadows that refused to disappear. Eliza Chen received a Pulitzer nomination for her coverage of the case and used her platform to spotlight similar patterns in small towns across the Midwest and South. And Noah? He left Grey Ridge, started a legal defense nonprofit focused on rural injustice. But not before mailing Celeste one last note. I didn't just find my courage. You gave it back to me. Celeste still wakes early, still walks 5 miles before sunrise, still counts her steps. But she doesn't look back often, because looking back means asking, what would have happened if I stayed quiet? And she already knows. What happened was this. They put her in a room to erase her, but she turned that room into something bigger. Not revenge, not justice, something quieter. Legacy. What would you do if the world mistook your kindness for danger? Have you ever found yourself silenced in a room not meant for your voice, where your truth was inconvenient, your dignity overlooked? Celeste Harrington didn't fight with noise. She endured with focus, with grace, and in doing so, she reminded us that quiet doesn't mean weak, it means steady. It means waiting for the right moment and never backing down when it finally arrives. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been judged before you had a chance to explain yourself? Or seen someone else erased by a system that wasn't built for them? If you have, know this: your story matters too. Resilience doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like standing up after being forgotten. Sometimes it looks like choosing to rebuild something better from the very room that tried to break you. So if you found strength in this story, consider subscribing to this channel for more voices that deserve to be heard. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Share this episode with someone who's been through something similar. Your voice might be the one that helps them feel seen. Because like Celeste showed us, they put her in a room to erase her, but she turned that room into something bigger. We'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned.